Hello and welcome to No Restrictions Podcast, the show dedicated to sharing the mental health stories of powerlifting athletes to help you feel less alone in your own struggles. My name is Karen, your host and the owner of No Restrictions Apparel. I'm a sub 63 kilo Canadian powerlifter and mental health advocate. Today's guest is Brittany Schlater, an open 84 plus kilo powerlifter, 3-time Canadian champion, and 2021 IPF Worlds Gold Medalist. You may have heard of the infamous Reddit thread that was dedicated to bullying Brittany over her appearance due to the physical symptoms of her polycystic ovarian syndrome and questioned her drug-tested status because of her extraordinary strength. The ongoing abuse nearly made her take her own life, and when brought to light, shook the powerlifting community. In this episode, Brittany takes back the narrative and shares her story, which teaches us that you never know what someone has and is going through, and that bullying is never okay. Before we jump in, I want to remind you that for every episode we release, you have a chance to win a gift card to No Restrictions Apparel, our apparel brand for people who live for their mental health. All you have to do is post a photo of yourself listening to this month's episode on your Instagram story. Don't forget to tag our Instagrams at No Restrictions Pod and at No Restrictions Apparel. I'll leave more information about it in the show notes. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. Brittany, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So the first time that I heard your name was actually when I was recording episode 3 with Natasha Cheng. We were talking about Operation 123, where you won first place, Lainey Bishop won second, and Natasha won third at Nationals 2022. So after recording with her, I actually listened to your King of the Lifts episode, and man, I didn't expect it to be so hard to listen to. But as someone who's interested in the mental health aspect of the sport, I really appreciated hearing you open up about some of your mental health experiences. After hearing parts of your story on that episode, I knew that I just needed to talk with you.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough episode to record, but I'm glad I did, and I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper with you today.
I'm really excited. So before getting into the Reddit ordeal, can you walk me through your mental health story, starting from childhood, so that we can get a better idea of how your life experiences shaped you into the person you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely had a rough start as a child. I was actually a really sick kid, so a lot of just like medical issues going on. And then I had a younger sister that was born when I was 5 and she passed away. And shortly after she passed away, my parents got divorced. And this caused me to have a lot of negative feelings of self-worth and trying to understand how to, move my life in a direction when I felt like I had let down people around me. And I carried a lot of guilt around the situation.
Would you mind explaining some of the specific reasons for why you felt guilty for the passing of your little sister and the divorce?
For sure. Yeah, so when she passed away, I had been really excited for her to come into the world, and I was very excited to have a younger sibling. And then when she passed away, just seeing my family was upset and people were going through hard times, I just felt like if perhaps it had been me that had passed away, that my family wouldn't have taken it so poorly and they would have been doing better than if it were my little sister that had passed away. So I felt guilt in that regard, that it should have been me instead of them. And then with my parents' divorce, as a young kid, you don't really understand what's going on. And so I had like this wholehearted belief that if I had done something differently, or if I had changed the way I had behaved or something like that, my parents would have stayed together.
Did you tell your parents about any of this, or is this something that you kept to yourself?
It was something that I kept to myself because my parents were already going through so much, and seeing them in an emotional state that I had never seen them before, I didn't know how to respond, so I kept a lot of things to myself.
So how did you cope with these feelings?
So coping with these feelings, even from a very young age, I started relying on self-harm, which has looked different throughout the years for me. But I would do silly things to my body that would try to injure myself on purpose, starting at, age 6 probably. And again, that's developed over the years and struggled and it's looked different as time has gone on. But that was my main coping mechanism, that and keeping all of my feelings bottled up and trying not to weigh down anybody else in my life.
I think there are misconceptions about self-harm, and some of these might be like self-harming is attention-seeking, manipulative, like towards other people, and how people who self-injure can stop it if they want to. So for you, emotionally, what does self-harming achieve?
It achieves like a sense of control over a situation, of myself, of my body, of something I'm doing that in my mind at the time didn't have any impact on other people. Like it was something that I controlled over myself rather than somebody else controlling over me. And I also used it as a form of punishment to myself, for all of the negative feelings that I had towards myself. I kind of took it out on my own body, and that was kind of like my form of punishment.
So, like, when you felt that it should have been you who passed away, or you could have done something, that negative feeling, like you were punishing yourself for, like for those feelings.
Yeah, it was like a way of, like, I don't know, almost seeing, like, if I do this, would it make the situation better? Like, if if I'm punishing myself, does it ease the feelings of, I'm the one that should have gone, or does it help me gain a sense of control over those feelings or emotions?
Did the pain ever deter you from self-harming, or was that something that you were drawn to?
I think it was something that I was drawn to. It definitely didn't deter me. It was kind of like, how much can you handle when your emotional toll has been so heavy? What can you handle physically? And obviously, like, if you're dealing with all of these emotional things, it's a lot easier to tolerate physical pain, and you almost become numb to it. So, like, it kind of grows the amount that you're self-harming, because you're seeking a baseline level of pain and control, and so by doing that, it just keeps snowball affecting, just getting more and more.
How did your self-harming snowball?
So it started, like I was saying, like you're chasing that baseline effect, but the baseline effect doesn't, like, the things you were once doing to yourself don't, sorry, I'm like trying to dance around it, but the things you were once doing to yourself don't create the same effect. So it's kind of like if you're experiencing drugs for the first time, like your first experience is going to be something, but the second time you try it, so you just start using more and more because you're chasing that same first time effect.
So, like, you build up a tolerance to
Yeah.
the feeling that you get from doing whatever you did.
Yeah, so you're constantly chasing that initial feeling again, and it takes more to duplicate that feeling and replicate it.
After your parents' divorce when you were 5 years old, how did that change the family dynamic, and how did that affect you growing up?
So it definitely changed my family dynamic because my dad moved to a different state, so he was living further away. And my mother wasn't there as much as a maternal figure because she was dealing with her own trauma and pain and trying to experience her life and her trauma in a different way. So it kind of drove my whole family apart. My sister was never around because she was always with friends, and I grew up with my friends because my mom wasn't there as much as, most people's parents are. And my father was in the picture for, like, school vacations, but not really there as a paternal figure either.
So it sounds like you had to, like, instantly grow up from after age 5.
Yeah, I was definitely doing a lot of raising myself and growing up with other families rather than my own family. You just kind of found family and made them your family. And I had a lot of teachers in school that would help me along because they knew what I had gone through to an extent, and they would help, kind of steer me on the right path and step up as mentors.
What kind of new responsibilities did you have to take on as basically an adult in the body of a 5-year-old?
So I had to pretty much care for myself in a lot of different ways, like getting myself to and from school, making sure that I had, like, my lunch money, my lunch pack, something like that. Taking care of my own emotions, I felt like was my own responsibility rather than navigating that with my parents, because I was just very, very concerned about being a burden to anybody in my life. So very much grew up and became a little adult at the age of 5, 6.
In what ways would you say that did the feeling of guilt affect you as you grew up through like your teenage years, or even like soon after the divorce?
Yeah, so guilt is something that I've carried with me for many, many years, and I never really worked on until somewhat recently. But that guilt that I experienced from young age, I have carried with me into my adulthood, and it again, like grew into this huge thing where I experience immense feelings of guilt over little things in my day-to-day life. And I constantly have the nagging feeling of guilt and that I should be punished for the things that I've done wrong, even though they're not necessarily things that I've done wrong. It's just part of the human experience. But in my mind, there's an immense amount of guilt associated with that.
And how has that affected your relationships with other people?
So, a lot of me feeling like I'm the shortcoming in a relationship, even if I'm giving 100% to a relationship, I know I will still feel guilty about a situation, or if I'm treated wrong in a relationship, I immediately believe that something was my fault or I could have done something differently to make them not respond in the way they did. So, a lot of guilt in relationships that I've been working on, but definitely carries through into my relationships now, and I've gotten better over the years at like catching myself and like using my rational brain to talk through it, but it definitely is still there in all of my relationships day to day.
So, as a teenager, teenagers tend to go through a lot, especially with hormones and just growing up in general. How was that for you, considering what you've gone through in your earlier years?
So teenage years were definitely really stressful. My first year of high school, I was living with my mother, and she found out that I was gay, and so I was grounded for the full year. And then I moved in with my father. I left home one day to go to a movie with my friend and never went home to my mother's house. I went and lived with my father, and I lived with him for a year before he moved out of the country. And then I stayed there. So I was living alone by the age of 16.
You you mentioned that your mother found out you were gay and then proceeded to ground you for a year. How what do you mean by found out?
So it's not a
It
position
doesn't
that
sound
I
like you came out to her or anything.
Yeah, no, it's not a position that I would have felt comfortable coming out in, but there had been a note from my then girlfriend in my school pants pocket, and she found it doing laundry, so I was then outed to her. And
Mm.
she did not like my girlfriend, so I was grounded from any social events or pretty much life in general.
So considering your life experiences before and how you've struggled to, I guess, develop healthy relationships because of things that happened, how did that affect your mental health on top of everything that happened?
It was probably one of the lowest points of my life. I was very isolated and very reliant on self harm. And when you're alone, after school with nothing to do and you're just like caught in your own thoughts, it's easy to fall back into these patterns because she was never home. She was working, and my dad, like I said, wasn't there. So it was just a lot of me time stuck in my own head. So it definitely complicated things, especially you throw in all of the teenage hormones and emotions and school situations that are already going on that are new and challenging. It was definitely a rough go there for a couple of years.
Now in 2022 or 2023, when this episode's out, I think, um, right now we are more accepting of people in the LGBTQ plus community, but back then, I'm not sure what year would have been, but it's definitely more conservative back then. With the, I guess you could say, the atmosphere around LGBTQ plus people, did that make you feel guilty for being gay, or did you, like, what kind of thoughts did you have at the time?
So at the time, I was attending a very Catholic high school. So I was constantly getting in trouble for being near my girlfriend at the time. So yeah, there were feelings of guilt, but it's not something that I ever considered to be wrong, if that makes sense. So for whatever reason in my head, like that was okay because I know it's just the way that I am. But it's not something that I experience guilt for being. It's just like the actions of, and always being in trouble at school for being gay and like being bullied by a bunch of people, like that's kind of the guilt that I felt like, oh, if I weren't this way, not that I have an issue with being that way. It was just like if I had been born differently or whatever.
Well, that makes me happy to hear, because I
Yeah.
know a lot of people like have trouble coming to terms with their sexual orientation.
Yeah, for sure.
I believe that our childhoods are very formative and strongly influence who we are today. So, looking back on young Brittany in this situation, what are some things that you notice that make you go, oh, so this is why I'm like this right now?
Yeah, there are several things, and I mean there are lots of positive things that have come out of it, but some of the like main things that I realize and I catch myself doing that are thought patterns from when I was a child are still experiencing the feelings of guilt. I still struggle with my self-worth basically every single day. I have anxiety in new situations still, and especially those in which I don't feel like I have any sort of control over. And I have really dysfunctional thought patterns that have followed me forward from childhood.
Would you mind elaborating more on those dysfunctional thought patterns?
Yeah, sure. So, just like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Just like, I don't know, my brain. I always talk to my therapist about how I have emotional brain and rational brain. And rational brain always wants an answer for something, so it tries to figure out emotional brain, but it doesn't work in a linear path. Like, say you're driving and I get a flat tire, it's immediately like my brain just like goes from point A to somehow this is my fault on a bigger scheme of things rather than like, oh, that's shit luck. But it just like automatically jumps to point A, from point A to point B. And I have to really pick apart my thought patterns to try to figure out what actually makes sense to like normal human beings. Because otherwise it's easy to fall back into the traps of my former brain.
It kind of sounds like a different form of catastrophizing, where it's you go from like you go straight to, oh, this is my fault, like whatever
Yeah.
happened was because of me and not an act of God. So when did you start therapy?
So I was in therapy after my younger sister passed away. I don't remember much of it. And then I tried therapy several times throughout high school and university. In high school, I didn't want to be there. It was court ordered through the transition of living with my mother to my father. I had to go, and I didn't want to be there, so I didn't participate in a way that was beneficial. And then in university, I made a good faith effort, but I never found a therapist that I clicked with. And then I've been with my current therapist now for 2.5 years, or a year and a half, something. It feels like forever, but she's the first person that I've ever clicked with and been in the right mind state to actually work on my issues with.
That's good. So what are some things that you've learned to help you deal with your feelings of guilt?
A lot of picking my own brain apart and reframing situations. So a lot of my like both in like sport and life, I treat myself or try to treat myself like I would treat anybody else. So if I wouldn't say something to somebody else going through a situation, then I should not say that to myself. And if I catch myself saying those things that I wouldn't say to somebody else, I make myself reframe it. And eventually your brain kind of starts reprogramming itself to not jump from point A to point B and catastrophizing things like you were saying. So reworking the thought patterns, which takes a lot of work and a lot of practice.
Could you give me an example of this in place for, let's say, if you fail a deadlift, like a deadlift
Yeah.
single that you like, or like you were going for a PR that like you're really excited for, you thought you could do it, but then like let's say you just couldn't.
Yeah, so like past brain me would immediately, like you were saying, catastrophize it, and something is my fault and I'm responsible and I'm a failure or whatever. But now I would never say that to my best friend who failed a deadlift PR attempt. So I won't allow myself to say that to me. So I say, it wasn't in you today. That doesn't mean you don't have it. Like maybe you didn't sleep as well last night, or your recovery or nutrition wasn't on point. Like, just clean it up and you'll get it next time. So definitely a huge 180 in thought pattern there. But it takes a lot of practice to switch your brain.
Yeah. I'm drawing some parallels between what you're saying and what Natasha said, because for her, like a lot of her self-worth was dependent on lifting. And especially
Mhm.
since lifting, like literally everything, like all the results that come from it comes down to the effort that you put in. I can see definitely how they could like facilitate. I'm not sure if facilitate's the right word for this, but like it could bring about those kinds of old Brittany thought patterns.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's pivot to powerlifting. How did you first hear of, discover, start powerlifting?
So I started going to a Good Life in 2015 just for like overall strength and well-being. I had never heard of powerlifting or anything of the sorts. I just have always been athletic and I wanted to get back into the gym. So I started going to the gym and members were like, "Oh, you're really strong. You should compete." And I was like, "Yeah, haha, that's funny. I'm not that strong. Like I know I'm strong, but not that strong." And then like more and more people just kept telling me like, no, like you should compete. And I was like, compete in what? So I heard about powerlifting in 2000, like late 2015, and I took a course through DTS Education and learned about powerlifting. And I spoke to the course moderator about it, and I was like, "Oh, do you think I would be cut out for powerlifting? Like these are my gym lifts." And they were like, "Why are you not powerlifting already?" So I signed up for my first competition in 2016, and the rest is pretty much history.
So, how did you get started in lifting in the first place?
So I've always been into athletics and some kind of sport growing up. So I was in university and kind of took a break from all of the different kinds of athletics because I was focused on my studies and going through really bad depression. But after university, I kind of decided enough was enough and it was time to get my shit together. Like, I'm getting older and it's time to start taking care of my body. So I started lifting right after I got out of university and decided to take things into my own hands.
Has your mental health improved since starting exercising?
So when I first started, I kind of went down a really bad rabbit hole of struggling with different kinds of disordered eating, including binge eating disorder and over restricting. And I was also chronically over exercising because I was so focused on like reaching my goals of like weight loss to manage my polycystic ovarian syndrome and thyroid issues. So I was over exercising. Like I was in the gym every single day for probably at least 4 hours, which was like more than the body could handle, obviously. And I wasn't giving myself any recovery days or rest days. So it was just like 7 days a week, just balls to the walls, going to the gym. So that was not beneficial to my mental health. But since then, I have eventually developed a healthier relationship with exercising that has helped my mental health.
What do you think um, caused you to go balls to the walls with exercising?
I think because I'm sort of an overachiever in everything I do. So it's like if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it 110% and give everything I have. And so I didn't realize that, and maybe I did realize that what I was doing had negative impacts on myself. But I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it well. And then, you have people egging you along, like, oh, you're looking really good, or like you're really dedicated. And that like positive feedback keeps you coming back for more.
So you mentioned that you struggled with binge eating disorder and a restrictive eating disorder. So my understanding is that restricting comes first, and because you've deprived yourself of food and nutrients, that's when a binge episode comes in. So it's kind of like what I discussed with Vernie Cormier in episode 1. Is that something that you resonate with, or did you have like a different kind of situation there?
No, it's definitely something that I resonate with. It's a cyclical pattern that is really hard to break free from, because you're like, oh, after this time, never again, and then you start right back in the same patterns, and you are restricting, and then after restricting so much, you're like, you know what, screw this, and then you end up binging, and then you feel like shit, and so you restrict, and it's a hard cycle to break out of. So definitely something I resonated with was her episode.
How long did that go on for, and how were you able to break free from the cycle?
It went on for about 2 years, and I broke free from the cycle through powerlifting, but it does still come back occasionally. Like, I recently was struggling with restricting and binging about, I don't know, throughout this past summer. So breaking free, like, I'm still working on it, because it does come back and it catches you off guard. Like, you don't realize you're doing it until it's too late. And then breaking out of that pattern again through therapy and working with a nutrition coach and trying to remember like my powerlifting goals definitely helps.
How does powerlifting help?
Powerlifting helps in that regard, because I know I have goals, and I have very specific goals that require you to give everything you have. Like Natasha was saying, like, it's pretty much all in. So that includes like your sleep, your recovery, your nutrition, every aspect of your life goes into this sport if you are seriously dedicated to it. And remembering those goals helps me to, stay on track and stay out of this ugly cycle of binging and restricting.
I don't know why I keep like my mind goes to like balls to the wall. It's probably not really podcast friendly, but like so it's like you want to go like full steam ahead on, well, you started with going full steam ahead on the binge eating disorder, the restricting eating disorder, but now that at the time, now that you have powerlifting, you get to go full steam ahead for powerlifting, which basically forces you to forces you to build a healthy relationship with food. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, definitely. And it's been a lot of work working with a nutrition coach, and she's seen like the ebbs and flows and the massive setbacks, and, also accomplishing really great things. So I'm really fortunate. I work with Danny from Calgary Barbell, and she's been phenomenal in this journey.
When you said that it catches you off guard, what are some of the signs that you notice in yourself when you're getting started with a cycle?
So I know what I generally do, eating wise, and like I track my nutrition down to like what time I'm eating my meals based on my training. Like, it's very goal specific, and I fully believe though that you have to have food freedom. So like if I want to go out for a meal or go out for a treat with friends or whatever, it's no big deal. But it's like when one thing becomes another, it's kind of like, okay, I'm just going to go for a treat on Saturday, and then, okay, now I feel like shit on Sunday, so I'm going to restrict. And then you end up having something on Sunday too, and then you restrict, and you're like, all right, I'll clean it up for Monday. But then Monday comes, and it's like, now I'm restricting, and then you end up binging again. And it's just like, once it becomes, instead of like a one-time thing, it's like every single day I begin to realize like, hey, I'm falling back into that cycle.
Since starting powerlifting, did you continue to struggle with over-exercising or some other form of unhealthy relationship with exercising, or were you able to switch into like that full steam ahead, like we're gonna like be on track and have like healthy habits with powerlifting?
No. So when I first started powerlifting, I had a really, really unhealthy relationship with powerlifting and with myself. It was almost as if I was using powerlifting as like a socially acceptable way of punishing my body. It was like I wasn't causing physical harm that you could see on my body to my body. And people were encouraging you to continue pushing your body beyond a healthy amount because you, quote unquote, look better or you look healthier. So I definitely was using it as a negative thing and a way of punishing my body rather than doing it because it was something I enjoyed.
What does that look like in practice? What do you mean by like punishing?
So it was not allowing myself proper rest and recovery in training. It was constantly hitting exceptionally heavy weights, even though my body was kind of rejecting it. It was beating myself up mentally over missed lifts or poor performances. Just like, I don't know, a lot of negativity surrounding powerlifting rather than doing it because I enjoyed it. I did it because I was good at it. And it was something that I could, gain some sense of self-worth through.
At any point, or how far into your powerlifting career when this kind of mentality habits started really picking up?
So it was right off the start of my powerlifting career that I was thinking this way, and it lasted for probably the first 2 years that I was powerlifting before I realized that it was not a healthy pattern that I was following and that I needed to make changes.
Did you ever consider quitting powerlifting because of it?
I never thought about quitting powerlifting. I just realized that if it was something that I was going to continue to do, I needed to mend my relationship and change it, and go 180-degree flip. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a sustainable thing.
And how were you able to make those changes?
So I reached a rock bottom point at a gym session one day. And shortly after that, I actually had a medical emergency related to my polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I had to have emergency surgery. So I was forced to take 3 months off. And in those 3 months, I kind of worked on my mindset and was like, all right, if I'm going to continue this, then we need to figure out how to actually continue this without it being detrimental to your health.
Would you mind talking a bit more about that rock bottom and that emergency surgery?
Yeah, sure. So I was in a training session one day with a former quote unquote coach. He wasn't a powerlifting coach and didn't know much. So I wasn't really in good hands to begin with, but I was in a training session. He was constantly pushing me to max out in the gym, and I failed a deadlift in a training session. So not even at a competition, but I had been putting so much pressure on myself in the gym and for powerlifting in general that I felt like I was such a failure, and the only option would be to kill myself to get rid of these feelings of pressure that I had been putting on myself. It was so overwhelming. It felt like the only way out. And then I was sent home from the gym because I started sobbing and finally told my coach, this is what's going on and I can't keep doing this. There's too much pressure on myself. And then within the same week, I had ovarian torsion. So I had cysts on both of my ovaries, and one of the cysts had forced my ovary to flip. So it was cutting off oxygen to itself. So I had to have emergency surgery so as to not lose my ovary. And then the recovery from that, because they did have to cut through the abdomen wall, was 3 months. So I had some forced off time.
Holy shit. I don't know what to say to that, to be honest. Holy shit, that's intense. It's terrible timing too.
Yeah, I mean, really good timing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, so
yeah.
while you... Sorry. Yeah, well, yeah. I guess so, when you, in hindsight, it was a good wake-up call, but at the moment, it must have felt absolutely crushing.
Mm-hmm.
With these two events happening, an intense powerlifting kind of crisis and then a health PCOS crisis, you mentioned that you considered after that bad training session that the only way out was to unalive yourself. And then you had that surgery. During the recovery period, Did you ever think about unaliving yourself after, during that period, or did something happen, or did you have a serious talk with yourself, something has to change?
I mean, I had a serious talk with myself, but I was still in a very, very bad depressive state. So it is accompanied with a lot of those feelings. So it was not abnormal to feel that daily. So definitely experienced a lot of that in my recovery period, especially not being able to do much. Again, you're left alone with your thoughts.
How were you able to change those thought patterns and come out of that experience healthier?
So that's when I really started doing a lot of research into athlete mindset and reading a lot of books and research. I love learning things. So I was I'll use logic brain to work through and defeat emotional brain. So I taught myself as much as I could. And that is really when I began the whole don't talk to yourself the way you would that you wouldn't talk to a friend. So that, and it used to feel like the stupidest thing ever. And I felt like such a fake person doing it to myself, but it ended up working. But that's when I really started that whole thing.
How long did it take to go from the starting point to where the point where you feel like you've kind of improved significantly enough where you can comfortably say that you're no longer in the danger zone?
Yeah, it probably took a good year and a half to 2 years of working constantly, every single training session, every single day. But again, it's not a linear thing. Healing isn't a linear thing. And I still have some experiences where things come back and I find things creeping in. But I would say about a year and a half to 2 years, I started noticing a significant difference.
So thinking about when you first started powerlifting to where you are now, how has your relationship with powerlifting changed over time?
So it's done a total 180, and it's honestly it's hard to even remember how I used to be as a powerlifter, which is a huge accomplishment in and of itself. But powerlifting is now something that enhances who I am as a person rather than just defining who I am and what I'm worth. And I've connected more to the human aspects of powerlifting and realized that I'm not just a number on a scorecard, and that I have so much more worth both inside and outside of powerlifting than just what I achieve on a scorecard at the end of the day.
That's amazing to hear. How does powerlifting specifically help with your mental health, like the act of powerlifting on your brain chemistry?
Yes, so I think it really makes you be in tune with your mind and your body, because you have to have your mental side aligned with your physical side, otherwise powerlifting just doesn't work. But as far as mental health goes, it gives me a sense of responsibility to myself and taking care of myself. And it gives me something to fall back on when I'm in a really depressive state, because often in my depression, it blinds me of the things that I love and I care about. But I know that powerlifting is one of those things. So I always have that to go to training, even if I don't feel like it. And giving 10% is better than giving 0%, because at the end of the day, you're beating depression by showing up. And just that consistency gives me something that I feel like I have to rely on.
Yeah, just stacking those little victories, however small they may be. I'm curious, when you're in a a very deep depressive state, people say that lifting, exercising in general, releases endorphins. Do you feel endorphins when you're in that deep state, or is it all about stacking that one single win from that session?
I think it depends, because not every one of my depressive states have been the same. They all vary slightly. So there are times that I still do get joy out of powerlifting and I do feel the endorphins and I leave a training session feeling better. But there are other times where I find that it just exhausts me even more. But just doing that little thing or giving that little bit does stack that little win. So I think it goes both ways. Most of the time I do get endorphins out of training. and I feel better after a training session, but there have been times that I don't, and I'm just doing it because it's some kind of routine to stick to rather than staying in bed all day.
And because you're a champion, you're like incredibly strong, like leagues better than me. Does knowing that you're a very strong person help with your mental health, or is that just like being strong is what's the word? Like a constant, not like a consequence, but like something that just comes after all the training that you put in for your mental health. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. Honestly, like, I don't know. People will say that I'm a very modest lifter, but I don't see myself as any different than any other power lifter. It doesn't matter that I'm like quote unquote strong or like a former world champion. I just am me, and like I don't see myself as like anything special or anything different. Like I'm just like every other power lifter that's grinding it out and trying to be better than they were the day before. So I don't think it necessarily has much of an impact now. Before it did, because I would put all of that pressure on myself to be the best. But now I'm just an average person as far as I'm
Right.
concerned.
It's good to have that ego checked in, I guess. um, I've heard people calling you Kimberly Walford's apprentice. So, what role has she played in your powerlifting and mental health journey? Like, how did you meet? And like, how did you and her friendship develop?
Yeah, so apprentice is a funny word. I'm still not sure why it was chosen, but that's okay. So Kimberly Walford is one of my best friends, and we met on a trip to Zimbabwe for Lift for Life. We were hosting powerlifting seminars, and we hosted a powerlifting meet, and I think several people that were on the trip were intimidated by her, so they were timid to talk to her because she's a shining star. But again, I choose not to like idolize people, so I just talked to her like she was an average person, and we became really close on that trip. And she's definitely been there for me through, some of my lowest lows, both in powerlifting and in life. She's been like a steady rock who believed in me, like again, both in lifting and life when I didn't have the capacity to believe in myself. So she's definitely been that strength for me when I needed somebody to lean on. But yeah, she's one of my best friends. Again, apprentice. I'm not sure where the word came from, but I think it's hilarious. She ended up coaching me actually for a few years because going into 2019 provincials, I had to fire my coach last minute. And I was 10 weeks out, so I messaged her because she's my friend. And I was like, hey, can you help me out for the next 10 weeks? And we ended up having a really good coach athlete relationship and keeping that separate from our friend relationship. So I stayed with her for quite a few years. She actually coached me through winning the world title in 2021.
When I was listening to your episode on King the Lifts, you talked about how the 2021 Worlds was a bit of a roller coaster. Um, would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, for sure. So Worlds was interesting in 2021 to say the least. I had been suffering from really bad anxiety and panic attacks leading up to Worlds, not related to lifting, just about life in general. And I found that pressure that I used to put on myself when I started lifting had started creeping back in because there was a wide open platform at Worlds where I had potential to win. And so I felt that pressure sinking back in, and I was like, you have to win or else. And it was a constant battle of emotional brain versus like logic brain, and trying to talk myself out of thinking that way, but still kind of feeling that way. But I went into Worlds with very little expectations because I had talked myself down. And I was like, you know what? If you don't win, it's not the end of the world. But I got there and I started warming up squat. And on my third squat warm up, I ended up having a panic attack. So I was 2 warm-ups out from taking the platform and having a full-blown panic attack. I actually failed the warm-up, and my coaches had to catch me. Luckily, they were spotting me at the time. But I had a full-blown panic attack, and luckily Kimberly was able to be my personal coach that day because they didn't have a USBI athlete. So she was there and helped kind of talk me through it, talk me down, and bring me back to a level headspace to continue the competition.
Could you give me an example of like a conversation that your emotional and your rational, logical brain would have or did have at Worlds?
Yeah, so emotional brain is the one that seeps in and it pushes me and puts the pressure on. And it's like, you have to win this for your self-worth. You have to win this or you're a failure. You have to win this or like your life means nothing. And logic brain is the one that I've been training for all these years that tells me, you know, it's just a competition. It has nothing to do with your self-worth. You can't control what other athletes do. You can only control what you do. So I settled in, and the mindset that I went forward with into Worlds was you can only make your own lifts. So all I focused on was making lifts because that was the capacity that I could allow myself without my brain taking over.
So it's basically like how, like your self-talk when you're in meet prep or when you're in competition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a never-ending battle between sides of my brain.
And although this is a podcast focused on mental health, how did the rest of your meet day go?
Meet day was fabulous. I ended up going 8 for 9. I believe I missed one bench. It was a great day. I tied, excuse me, I tied and won Worlds on body weight. So really hard to complain about that.
Considering like where you started on that day with the panic attack and your anxieties and, you know, battling your emotional brain, and then the outcome, which is winning, what lessons has that taught you?
That I'm more resilient than I think I am. I can bounce back from things. I don't let what happens dictate what's going to happen, which I think is a huge lesson for myself and for anybody else. Things can start off poorly and you can change it around. You just have to be able to control your mindset instead of just like accepting defeat, like, oh, clearly this day is not made out for me. You put it down. It is what it is. It's something I dealt with. Not everybody has to deal with, but that doesn't make me less than.
Did you find it hard to reinforce those rational like brain thoughts, especially because it's not just a national platform, but it's international?
Yeah, it was definitely the most challenging time I've had, which is interesting because it wasn't my first Worlds, but I was the one that I was most nervous for and the least mentally prepared for. But I don't think you're ever able to know how you're going to respond to a situation until you're in it. So you just have to play the hand you're dealt, and trying to talk through what I was going through with both myself and my coaches really helped having a good support system.
So the Reddit ordeal, when you recorded that episode with Ryan on King the Lifts, it was like just under a month since it all happened. And 1 month surely isn't enough to process everything. And it's been about a year since then. So let's talk about it from a less fresh perspective. And so PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, it plays a significant role in what happened on Reddit. So I think now is a good time to talk a bit about it and to build a bit of a backstory. So what is PCOS?
So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, like you mentioned. It is a condition in which you have cysts that form on your ovaries, which is not an uncommon thing for women to experience in general. But for some people, it is worse, and they have a lot of symptoms because of it. The ovaries, or the cysts on your ovaries, cause your hormones to go out of whack, and it's very hard to regulate them. And there's no cure for PCOS. There are treatments such as like hormonal birth control, which I cannot take. So I just have to kind of deal with it and try to manage it on its own. But yeah, it's a hormonal nightmare, especially stacked on top with the thyroid issue. It just like all my hormones are out of whack all the time. So definitely not a fun condition, but something that more people deal with than I think is talked about.
How come you can't take hormonal birth control to help with your symptoms?
So I took hormonal birth control for a period of about a month and a half in high school, and I ended up getting a blood clot in my lung, and my lung collapsed. So I was in the hospital for like 3 months because of it, but I cannot take hormonal birth control because it causes blood clots. Surprise.
Yeah. Surprise indeed. I wasn't expecting to hear that, so I'm a little speechless. So like there's like on birth control you get like a big pamphlet of like side effects that could happen. Most of the cases, I think most of the cases at least, people don't have them or like they're very minimal, but
Yeah,
you won the jackpot, didn't you?
I did. I was the winner.
Yeah. Holy shit. God damn. So, what are the symptoms of PCOS? Like physical? Well, you mentioned like the cyst, but I mean, like I guess you can't really exactly notice them. But so, what are like the physical symptoms, the manifestations of PCOS, and the mental aspects? If I'm sure there are some.
Yeah, for sure. So it varies from person to person. Like many people will deal with like severe acne. That's not something I ever struggled with though. But I deal with like thinning hair on the top of my head, darker body hair than most women have, and excess body hair, like unwanted. So like a mustache and, just like thicker body hair in undesirable places. And then there's the physical aspects, which I've had cysts on my ovaries that have caused like substantial amounts of pain in my pelvis. And it's limited me from doing certain exercises at some points because the cysts were so large that it actually impacted my abdomen. And then there's the mental aspect. People with PCOS tend to suffer from depression more than those who do not have PCOS. So just stacking things on top of each other for me.
You mentioned that sometimes the pain in your pelvis is so great that you can't participate in some activities. It makes me think about squats because there's a lot of like hip movements. Do you feel pain when you squat sometimes or all the time?
Sometimes. So I had a period of about 2 months, about 6 months ago, that squatting was really painful because I had a hemorrhagic cyst, which is a cyst full of blood, on one of my ovaries, and it caused really, really painful squats. But there's nothing you can really do except wait for it to rupture. So I just like pushed through, and eventually one day it did rupture, and now I don't have pain with squats. So most of the times I don't have pain with squats, but there are times where it flares up.
Rupture.
Yeah.
Does that require surgery or like what happens?
So that one didn't require surgery. It just like ruptured. It's like a very sharp pain. It can cause some people to be hospitalized, but I have like a freakishly high pain tolerance. But it ruptures, and then the cyst comes out just through like you would have your period essentially.
When were you diagnosed and when did the symptoms start showing?
So I was diagnosed around age 10 because it is a highly genetic thing, and my mother has it, and my sister was diagnosed at the same time. So my sister was around age 14, and they were like, yeah, she has it too, like talking about me. I started seeing symptoms like right before puberty around like age 11, 12. But again, like I'm sure there were signs when I was younger. I just didn't realize what they were and what it meant.
So having those symptoms with the body hair and the other symptoms before puberty. So for many people, body image issues are something that they have to deal with when they're in their teenage years, not just for like, you know, hormonal reasons, but just life and peer pressure and or whatever, like, you know, whatever's going on. That's just an age where there's a lot of development happening very quickly, and just it's a big transition from childhood to adulthood. So was your body image affected? Did you get bullied for the physical appearance differences? What are some of the things that you've experienced because of PCOS? Positive,
Yeah,
negative.
so I was definitely bullied as a kid and throughout high school for looking different because I was a bigger kid. I had thicker, darker body hair. I like grew a mustache, which was like ever so slight when I was a kid, but I was made fun of because I was different. Growing up, and it definitely impacted my body image and still does. Like, it's very difficult to deal with, and I would be lying if I'm like, yeah, I'm totally in love with my body, in love with myself now. Like, it's still something I struggle with.
In what ways were you bullied?
Um, Both verbal and physical to an extent. Physical was more in high school, but a lot of just like teasing and being made fun of and just like called names and I don't know, just like the normal like kids being kids, little shits.
Before the Reddit ordeal happened, would it be like safe-ish to say that you were kind of used to having those negative comments?
Yeah. Like it was definitely not something new, but not something that happened super often.
Okay, so Reddit. Reddit is basically an online platform with like a massive collection of forums for all kinds of topics. So let's get into it. So what prompted you to go on Reddit, and what made you stay when you saw the post?
Okay, so the backstory to how I ended up on Reddit is kind of weird. So there's one other person in the United States, which is where I was born, who is named Brittany Schlater, and she's within 1 year of my age. And at one point, we lived about 30 minutes away. So a couple of times a year, I Google my name just to make sure that there's nothing I need to know before crossing international borders. Like if she had been accused of a crime, just so I can be like, hey, there are two Brittany Schlaters, and like this one is not associated to me, just in case. Hyper paranoia stuff, I know. But I Googled my name, and up comes this thread on Reddit about whether I was natty or not, meaning if I was using performance enhancing drugs or not. And I was already in like a really bad mind state that day because of a relationship that I was in. I was just having a rough day. Was like super depressed anyways, so I opened the thread and start reading all of these comments about myself.
What made you stay and continue reading?
I think just like the whole saying that misery
How
loves
come you didn't
company.
want to stop?
Like the whole saying, like misery loves company. Like I was already in a bad state, so of course you want to give yourself a reason to be in a bad mental state almost. So reading it, like I don't know, I was almost like numb to it, and it just didn't feel like much at the time because I wasn't actually processing what I was reading. I was just kind of mindlessly reading it.
So, what kinds of thoughts did you have while reading those comments?
Um, so during reading it, I was very much like, I don't know, just like hard on myself and like, again, like those feelings of guilt, like I deserved it. It was something that I I had done wrong to deserve this, and the people were just speaking the truth, and that, you know, it was just something that I deserved to be going through.
And how about afterwards, when you like closed your laptop? What kinds of thoughts went through your head, or how did you react to it?
Yeah, so immediately after, it kind of all hit me at once, and I immediately was suicidal and began like planning out my letter per se, and ways in which I was going to fulfill these things. But I kind of caught myself and fell back into my emergency plan that I had created like well before in case of emergencies like this, uh, which included like contacting somebody immediately, which that person happened to be Lainey Bishop at the time. We weren't like super close, but she was somebody that I could be like, hey, something's going on. I just need distraction. So she was there for me right away until somebody in my immediate circle could be there for me, and help kind of talk me through it, or at least talk to me during it. And contacting somebody that lives physically close to me in case I needed to go to the hospital. But I ended up being able to like talk through it enough where that wasn't the case that night.
Are there other things part of your emergency plan, or is it just talking with people? Like, do you have like a little like when I think of a plan or like something like that, I think of like a box with like little tools in it. Do you have like physical things to help like soothe yourself, or yeah, like what other things were part of the emergency plan, if any?
Yeah, so I was having panic attacks too. So I ended up taking a medication for it, which is the main thing that got me through the night, which is like my emergency fallback on medication that helps with panic attacks and kind of knocks me on my ass. So I ended up falling asleep, but I didn't have like physical things. I tried to rely on my dog, but I was having a panic attack, and he is a high anxiety dog, rescue dog. So he ended up panicking and was
Mm.
just like barking at me. So I had to kind of separate myself from him. But no, it
Oh,
was just talking through things with my closest friends. So
what kinds of things did you talk about?
we talked at first. She literally was just filling the phone with anything to talk about to try to calm me down enough that we could have a real conversation about what was going on. So I don't even know what we talked about. Like, I have no recollection whatsoever. And even like when I was talking to Lainey, I think she was sending me pictures of foxes or something, and she had no idea what was going on, but just like some kind of immediate distraction. And then we talked about what had happened, and I showed her the post, and she like read through everything, and we kind of had like a good cry together, and we talked about where do we go from here, and what do we do with this, and how do we survive this, and what is the plan that we make going forward. But it was always we. It was not what are you going to do. It was how are we going to handle this. And she's my best friend. Her name is Anne, and we don't live close together, but it never felt like she was far, if that makes sense.
That's really good to hear. How did you move forward from it? What plan did you come up with?
So Anne and I, and also my sister and I, we discussed how to move forward from something like this, because I knew if I just like kept it to myself and bottled it up, it was something I was going to live with for years. And my sister was actually the one who suggested like taking back the narrative and taking back the power in the situation, whatever that happened to mean to me. And for me, that meant by doing nothing, like I wasn't going to get over the situation. So I decided to share my story publicly on Instagram, despite it being like the most challenging thing I think I've ever shared publicly, especially as like I used to be a shy little kid, and like coming out and talking about something like this out of the blue, totally not something I would normally do. But I decided that if my pain could lessen the pain of somebody else, my sharing my story was worth it. And I used it kind of as a reminder to treat everybody with kindness always, because you never know what somebody's going through.
Since posting that the carousel of various negative, horrible comments, what are some outcomes from it? What were the outcomes from that? Any positives? Any negatives? I'm sure there's a lot of positives. Well, I know there are a lot of positives.
Yeah. Yeah. So I posted it and just kind of expected, like, honestly, like a few close friends to be like, oh, like, it's okay, like, we got your back, something like that. But it kind of blew up into this huge thing that I never ever would have expected it to be. But I was getting, like, literally thousands of people reached out to me, both in powerlifting and outside of powerlifting, to tell me, you know, here are some supportive words, or like, you're incredible, keep going, or people sharing their own stories or like similar things, or telling me like, hey, like, I wish I could speak my truth, which is the same as yours, but I can't. So thank you for speaking up. So a lot of positivity came from that. And it made me realize that the powerlifting community and the community that I'm in general goes so far beyond like what anybody could ever imagine. There's so much love and beauty in our community, and I think it's often overlooked. Like, everybody's like, oh yeah, I love going to meets and we just pick up, and the camaraderie, which is so true. But it, like, these people, like, some people are strangers, and like, it just goes beyond what I could ever imagine from a stranger. And like, I had people that were telling me, you know, like, oh, I met you this one time and you had this great impact on me. And I don't know, like, I never think of myself as like an influential person or somebody that I'm impacting, but obviously, like, we don't realize the impact that we truly do have on people, even when we don't realize we're having that impact. So people are like, yeah, you're like such a light in my life, and like, I didn't even know their names, which kind of makes me feel bad, but at the same time, like, there were thousands of these people, and like, it really just goes to show like how you conduct yourself does matter.
If you could talk to the Brittany during that crisis period after reading those comments, what would you say to her?
I think I would just be like, listen to rational brain, like, it does, you do get through this, because at the time it just felt suffocating. Like, I literally couldn't breathe, and I never saw a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, it felt like the end. And just being where I am now, it's crazy. Like, I'm so far recovered from it. Like, obviously it still bugs me sometimes, but like, the life that has continued and like the last year has been absolutely beautiful, and I've created some deeper connections because of it, and like, sharing my vulnerability. So just knowing, or just telling myself that there is an end to that, is a really, I think, helpful piece of advice I could give past me.
Would you consider that that Reddit ordeal like your absolute rock bottom?
I wish I could say that was the lowest low, but it definitely wasn't. It was one of the lowest lows, but I would say definitely like high school, college years were tougher. Like, there were some tougher situations that happened, but in recent years, yes, that has been the most difficult thing that I've gone through. Which in some ways, like, I'm very fortunate that's it. It's just some internet people that I've never met in the grand scheme of things. But I think that was the lowest my mental health has been in a long time.
So since that happened, how has your outlook on powerlifting changed? For example, the next time, like the next post you made, or the next powerlifting related post that you made, or the next time you competed, or the next time you were in the public eye again?
Yeah, so the next post that I made was just talking about how blown away I was by the crazy amount of support that I had received, and thanking everyone, because I did read every single comment despite not having the capacity to respond to them. And I still do go read those comments from time to time when I'm feeling down, because it is a reminder that powerlifting is so much more than just the lifting aspect. But it has changed my perspective entirely. And I think the hardest thing was getting back on the platform after that. So I ended up competing at nationals this past year just for fun with Operation 123, because I knew that if I was going to be tormented again, at least I would have my girls with me. that I felt like I could rely on and get me through if something were to happen, or if I were to have a panic attack or something like that. Like, I knew I was in really good hands competing in the CPU rather than my next time being back on the world's platform. So I did CPU nationals just for fun. It was a sandbag meet and it was great. And then I did step back on the world's platform and it was exceptionally difficult. I ended up getting fourth, but I had a conversation with one of Kimberly's closest friends. Her name's Danielle. And we had a conversation after Worlds because I got fourth and I was crying, not because I was like upset with myself, just frustrated. And she was like, honestly, like, the biggest win was showing back up and not letting people take away your passion from you. And she was so right. Like, the fact that I had the guts to walk back on a world's platform after being tormented online was a huge win. And it doesn't matter that I didn't hit the podium, because people on the podium don't understand what even just showing up meant to me. So definitely a huge win there. And she just reminded me too,
100%.
like you're never, I don't know, like, you're never going to be everyone's cup of tea, and don't let that hold you back, and keep showing up, keep doing what you love. So that was a huge flip in the mentality of powerlifting.
Has what happened affected the way you approach the bar?
Yeah, so now I approach the bar with a smile, because I know, like, I'm fortunate to even have the opportunity to be there, and the fact that I've gone through as much as I have, and I'm still here and still showing up and still being a voice for people who might not be able to find their own right now. It really means a lot to me. And again, like, it's more than any total on a scorecard could ever mean.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I mean, like, after hearing everything, like, from your childhood and stuff, and then going through the experience myself of reading the comments that people were writing, and then now here talking with you, and you've come out so much better, in such a better place mentally. I don't have the words right now to, like, express how happy I am for you, and how proud I am of you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I'm definitely so proud of myself, because again, like, thinking back to that night, like, I didn't see a light at the end of that tunnel. Like, it just felt like that was it. That was all. And, like, that wasn't okay to me, though. Like, I don't know, some stupid people I've never met before and that have never met me, that's not what's going to dictate the rest of my life. Like, absolutely not. But finding a path forward was really difficult.
I can't even imagine that, but here you are. It's possible. So I have some closing questions that I ask every guest. So number one, what's currently your biggest mental health struggle, and how does lifting help?
Yeah, so my biggest mental health struggle is still depression mixed with anxiety. It's something I live with every day. It's something I'm going to live with every day for the rest of my life. I go through, like, cyclical bouts of depression, like really deep depression and then light depression, but, like, every day depression is in my life. There are never periods where I just feel okay and normal, but, like, that is my normal. So I've adjusted to that. And I think powerlifting has definitely helped because it provides that sense of routine and normalcy, and gives me something to fall back on when depression's blinding me from the things that I do enjoy and I do love.
When you say that they're, like, lighter periods of depression, what do they feel like? Like, what's the difference between light depression and deep depression?
So lighter depression, like, I'm able to function, but, like, in deep bouts of depression, I like, it depends again, like, what it's like that specific time, but it's a very physical thing. Like, I have aches and pains, my body hurts, I'm just, like, chronically exhausted. And then the whole mindset thing, like, sometimes I'm numb, sometimes I'm, just, like, really down, sometimes I'm really teary. And then, like, in the lighter bouts, it's just, like, those nagging little thoughts in my brain that are like, hey, hey, remember me? Like, are we gonna do this again? You're like, no, emotional brain, like, shut up, we're not doing this today. So it's easier to kind of shut down the thoughts that pop up every day rather than listening to them.
And question number 2, what's keeping you going in powerlifting right now?
So, keeping me going in powerlifting right now, I would have to say, is being better than I was yesterday. That's a motto in both lifting and life. Like, I'm always trying to improve as a lifter and a human being. The community, for sure. We just had Ontario provincials last weekend, and just being back around the community was a beautiful thing. And just like seeing the look on everybody's faces and like catching up with old pals, it's always so nice and so refreshing. So the feelings, and then just the spark that keeps being reignited every time I see things or see people. I watch videos on Instagram of people lifting, or like watching Rhea Stinn win the world championship again for equipped yesterday. Like, those things keep my heart chasing after my goals. So the spark in the community, for sure.
And question number 3, if you could change anything about the journey you took on from your lowest point to now, what would you change and why? So I guess this question has been modified because it's not, you said that the red ordeal wasn't your lowest point, but like, let's say theoretically that Reddit was the lowest point.
Yeah, for sure. It's really hard because I feel like I could fill a page with like would've, could've, should've's, but they don't serve anyone. They don't serve me. They don't serve anybody else. I wouldn't be who I am and where I am today without everything I've gone through, and that I continue to go through. So I don't necessarily think that I would change anything, which I feel like is the common response, but it's so true that like our stories and our experiences make us who we are.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Brittany. You are such a powerful voice for people with PCOS and people who are just brutally bullied. To be honest, I'm still so astonished by the fact that you didn't hide from the haters, but instead you took everything that they said and turned it into the most powerful fuel to teach an incredibly important lesson. And it's a lesson that I heavily believe in, and it's one of the biggest reasons why I started this podcast. And that lesson is to not judge someone based on what you perceive. You literally don't fucking know what the person you're looking at is going through. You literally don't have any fucking idea what the person has gone through to get to where they are today. So don't judge. But also, you taught us that you have the power to direct the narrative. And I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. And I'm sure that your story will touch the hearts of hundreds of people. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.